hello everybody, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar. I'm Richard Draycott, I'm the Associate Editor here at The Drum, and today's session is set to tackle a subject that I suppose has quietly dominated strategy decks, keynote presentations, campaigns, awards entries for the better part of a decade, and that is, of course, brand purpose. But rather than taking it at face value, I suppose today we're going to be asking a more or a slightly uncomfortable question, possibly a more useful question. Is purpose a genuine strategic growth lever, or has it become a distraction from the fundamentals of marketing effectiveness? I suppose in recent years, purpose shifted from being a kind of a brand differentiator to almost an expectation. Brands are increasingly expected to actually stand for something beyond their products, to signal their values and to engage in cultural conversations and so on. Yet at the same time, growing evidence has suggested that many consumers are actually kind of struggling to recall a brand stated purpose at all, and raising the important questions around awareness and commercial return. So today we want to move beyond the rhetoric and get a reality check. We'll explore how the industry's understanding of purpose has evolved, how far it may have drifted from its original intent, and whether it does truly drive loyalty, pricing power, and long-term growth. We'll examine the cultural forces that help purpose become such a dominant narrative in marketing, and crucially, we'll ask what marketers should prioritize next if purpose is no longer the silver bullet that it was once positioned as. Delighted to be joined by a great panel of speakers, all going to bring kind of slightly different perspectives to this debate, and they'll be led admirably by Rob Mosley of the agency Nonsense, who we've done a few webinars with over the last few months, and they're always full of good stuff. But together, his panel, who Rob will introduce, will help us unpack the gap between the theory of purpose and practice, share examples of where purpose has genuinely worked and where it may have been more about industry optics than business outcomes. So that's enough from me. Before I hand across to Rob and the panel, if you do have any questions during the session, then please do feel free to type them into the chat box. I'll endeavour to bring them into the conversation at the most relevant time, or alternatively, we can have a bit of a Q&A session at the end of the conversation and try to cover some of your questions and points. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Rob Mosley.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming, first of all. Yeah, welcome to our little latest webinar. Richard, thank you. Brilliant introduction. I think you've covered exactly what I want to get into today. For my two pennyworth, I'm a strategy partner at Nonsense, and our focus over the last 7 or 8 years has been about building brand credibility. And actually, people confuse that with the idea of brand purpose quite a lot. And I'm not here to try and explain the difference or sell anybody in on that right now, but I have been very interested in brand purpose as a result of that. I think that the most important question is whether or not it's an effective strategy for all brands in the silver bullet kind of way that it seems to have been, seen to be by the industry. It's blanket adoption, to be honest, over the last 10 years, especially the early part of the last decade. You have huge brands, the biggest agencies and networks putting it very central to what they are all about. And we do see them walking back from that a little bit now. And I think the big question for that is, why is it a fundamental realization that it's not being all it's cracked up to be, or is it something else? And we have an amazing panel of people who can help us dig into that. So first of all, we have Aidaly Sosa Walker. Aidaly, just say hello and give us a little wave so that everybody can see you.
Guys, welcome. Thank you for having me.
That's all right. So Aidaly's at Tony's Chocolonely, which I have to say are arguably one of the most successful purpose-driven brands and crucially businesses on the planet. When we had our first little chat, Aidaly, we talked about that, the importance of that distinction, whether or not it is a skin-deep marketing strategy only or something that is right to the core of a business, and really looking forward to you being able to speak to that. We have Victoria Tait.
Hi, Tori, everyone.
Sometimes goes by Tori, so, take your pick.
Either or.
So Tori's from the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute. If you haven't heard of them, they are pretty much the authority on anything to do with marketing effectiveness. They do the research that the rest of us don't. And Tori herself recently led a piece of research into the effectiveness of purpose as a brand strategy, and it'd be interesting to hear what you learned in that process, and also how it affected your view of this notion of brand purpose. And then finally, Mr. Steve Harrison. Steve, you say hello.
Hello there. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure, Steve. So Steve's a creative director and an author. I describe it as, like lots of copywriters who end up with some time on their hands, ends up writing stuff about the industry. You're, I guess, 2 books in as far as books that are directly address this notion of brand purpose. I know you've written more, but Can't Sell, Won't Sell, and then your most recent book, Adland's Progressive Gaze, both very directly deal with this idea of purpose and the social drivers in the industry around it. And Richard, you mentioned this. Like, what is, you touched upon, and I'm really interested in this. What was the reason that everybody went gaga for purpose in the first place? And do we have to accept that, maybe there was an element of want on behalf of a group of people to do purpose over and above whether or not it was actually the right thing to do from a purely marketing and advertising standpoint? So I have one question to kick us off for the whole panel. So fingers on the buzzers, aka unmute button. If you hear the phrase brand purpose, what do you think the industry means by it today? Because I've seen it get redefined a bunch of times. And do you think that has drifted a little bit away from what it was originally set out to be?
Can I have a go?
Go.
I think that there's an important distinction. I think that brand purpose was another way of saying a brand idea, which is an old-fashioned construct about the benefit of the psychological or the practical benefit that product or service would bring to the individual user. And that brand idea or brand purpose will build around that. And social purpose is a much broader remit, and that is to have a societal value. And I think that the two have been confused, sometimes intentionally, by proponents of social purpose, in that they've cited brand purpose successes in order to substantiate their support for social purpose. There's one of the founding fathers of social purpose, a man called Jim Stengel, wrote a book called Grow, how ideals power growth and profit for the world's greatest companies. And on closer inspection, the 50 big brands that he talked about, very few of them had a social impact. For example, Mercedes existed to epitomize a life of achievement, and Moët and Chandon existed to transform occasions into celebrations. No societal impact. They're good old-fashioned promises made to the consumer about how that brand would make your life better. But still, Stengel's book was taken as one of the canon used by social purpose advocates for why social purpose was the way to go.
Yeah, an attractive idea, right? Especially and I think, I speak for myself and most of the people who've tuned into this, especially if you are, you lean in that direction anyway in terms of your attitude towards all things.
But I think a lot of it was often bogus.
Agree. Okay, so maybe it even started on shaky foundations. Anybody else on the panel, in terms of what you think immediately when you hear this pairing of words, brand purpose?
I'll jump in there. I think today when the industry talks about it, it's really like the role of the brands. They choose to play in a world where beyond their product, they want to change just like the industry. At least for us, that is what purpose means to us. Just playing a role where we're leading by example and really changing what this industry could look like. I do think that originally purpose was meant to function as a North Star. And in our case, that's very much the case. And it's something that has shaped our business from end to end, from sourcing to product to our communication. I think where it's drifted a bit is in parts of the industry that purpose sometimes has become more of a messaging layer than something that is embedded in the operating system. And it becomes like a campaign tagline or a signal virtue, but doesn't always show up consistently in the consumer experience or when you zoom in to like a company supply chain. So I think consumers are then very quickly to spot this gap. So yeah, here we really try to focus on our North Star, and like we are anchored in that. And I've been at Tony's for 6 years now, and we talk about our mission every day. So you feel it every day. So it's very embedded. So yeah, so I think that's where it should be, but not sure. I think it's drifted a little bit from that intention in some other companies.
I think I'd agree. And also, even at Tony's, it's not like it dominates every single message you ever do in every layer of messaging. You talk a lot about how absolutely delicious the chocolate is itself, and you know, and as well you should. Okay, I think that's really interesting. Victoria, anything to add?
No, I think brand purpose exists now, but as a proactive approach of a brand having a social or an environmental objective outside of earning a profit. But I think it overall exists a part of just a shifting language of brands doing good outside of earning a profit, which started around the 1950s with corporate social responsibility, and then it's kind of morphed, and now this is where we've ended up with brand purpose. So yeah, I think what everyone said covers it. But yeah, it's a part of that shifting language of brands doing something more. And normally that's something positive for society outside of earning a profit.
Agree. And I agree. I think that's how a lot of people would define it. Whether or not it actually manages to do good, Steve will talk to you about that later. But I want to just stick with you, Tori, for a little minute, because your research, suggests that actually, consumers don't necessarily buy this purpose-driven stuff at a messaging level quite as much as certainly the level of adoption of brand purpose as a killer strategy would suggest it does. Can you just talk us through a little bit about the methodology and the key findings in your recent research?
Yeah, sure. So we conducted at the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute a large-scale consumer survey across the US, UK, and Australia, and we were testing consumer awareness of purpose brands, which we classified as the respondents' ability to correctly link the purpose brand to the purpose attribute, with the option to also say no, so we weren't forcing any responses either. In this, we tested and included the best-in-class purpose brands because we really wanted to give purpose the best shot of being known. We weren't selecting brands that had just done one purpose campaign. We were really looking for the leaders in the strategy. So they'd been doing it for a considerable amount of time and they had put a lot of resources into it. So for these, we selected brands like Patagonia with their environmental purpose, Ben & Jerry's, advocating for human and environmental rights. And then also we included Tony's Chocolonely. And overall, we found the results on average, only 1 in 5 consumers were aware of a brand purpose. So this overall, when looking at consumer awareness, is low. We did dive deeper in the data to see if any brands had some type of positioning for their brand purpose. And we did find that 1/3 of the purpose brands we tested were successful at creating that link in consumers' minds with their brand and the brand purpose. However, in most cases, around 80% of consumers were largely unaware of a brand's purpose, which was our key takeaway finding.
Okay, that's really interesting. And so I guess if we're not managing to because just cycling back a little bit, on the face of it, if you're going to put out one core message about your brand, one of the issues I have with purpose-driven messages is they're a bit complex, comparatively speaking. If you look at Tony's, taste bloody amazing versus helping to resolve issues macroeconomic around farming and blah, 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 blah. That takes a lot of explaining. And so if it's not a good awareness tool, which is my interpretation of the research, what does that also imply about whether or not purpose has the ability to drive loyalty or price premiums or long-term growth. Did you look into that at all, or is that?
Yeah, well, this is a great question. And this is why exactly we decided to investigate awareness, because it's the gatekeeper to all these claims about brand purpose. So, such as increase in sales, price premiums, and loyalty, consumers first need to be aware that a brand has a purpose in order to change their behavior because of it. So I guess for brands adopting a purpose in order to see some type of significant sales growth, they may be disappointed based on the fact that largely most consumers were unaware. But I think it's also important to note that our research looked at one area of brand purpose. We didn't investigate any internal effects it may have, if it helps with retailer relationships and gaining more shelf space, which that would be a really interesting question for Aidaly. And also if it encourages any social change, if that was the goal. However, if these are the objectives for those brands, again, we'd recommend to see, to make sure these are measured to see if they're actually delivering on these goals for those brands as well.
Great, thank you. And that does bring us on nicely to you, Aidaly. Like, I think you spoke to me yesterday a little bit about how you guys use your mission from a marketing point of view, rather than the mission is a marketing, right? So talk to me a little bit about that. Maybe you could answer Tori's question with regards to the retailer conversation and any other places you find having your purpose/mission to be really useful.
It's funny. I like what you just said to Victoria just now about really the message being so long. And I think sometimes when I do panels, I joke that we have a good elevator pitch if we were going up 100 floors and the elevator was moving very slow. Because it's very hard to land that message. It's a very complex message that focuses so much on the supply chain and the work that we're doing there, that we need to find a different way to tell that story. And I think for the US specifically, how we balance it here is really it's different than Europe, because I feel like the maturity of the brand and just the consumer context in Europe is far more it's in a different place than it is in the US. I think in Europe we've had a much longer runway to really educate. And I think the issues in our industry are the awareness for that is higher in Europe. So then you're dealing with the macroeconomic factors of these issues being just known in a specific market, what in the US is less so. So as a brand, the brand, when it was incepted, it was really, we have like these key pillars that drive us. One of them is to raise awareness, and we want to raise awareness for the issues happening in the cocoa industry. We want to lead by example, show people that you can do it differently, but we also want to inspire others to act, show ways that brands can choose to do things in a different way. And I think there's a lot of parallel between different industries to do this. From a retailer point of view, what Victoria mentioned earlier, retailers are a little bit more advanced than consumers. Obviously, it's all about the moment and the context that someone is, the brand is presented to them. So obviously, retailers do research. The buyers do their research. They look into the brands that they're choosing to work with. And that is not the same expectations that we can have from consumers. So I think for consumers, we need to really, like, the dilemma shouldn't be up to them. They shouldn't be picking between, oh, this product tastes good or this product does good. We need to make sure that we're combining the two, because we can't put the responsibility to them. We just, as a business, need to do the best we can to have a high standard in both these areas so that the consumer feels good about it. And that's how we also, for the US specifically, we lead with chocolate and we get the fans to stay for the mission. Because once they have the chocolate, they're sitting there enjoying it. On the inside of the wrapper, we have our manifesto, we tell our story. So that's when they have like a bit more bandwidth. It's all a matter when you're communicating to the consumer. It's all a matter of when you communicate with them, what is the context for it, and find the right message for them at the right moment. And that is something that we've learned how to balance it, but it's not easy. It's
Yeah.
the story underneath the surface is like a very complicated one.
Yeah.
Hi,
No,
Rob. Sorry, Rob, can I just jump in? I've had a couple of questions
yes, Richard, go.
that kind of feed into this kind of whole area of awareness. It's a question for Victoria, actually. Someone's asking if consumer awareness of social purpose remains relatively low, does that necessarily imply social purpose strategies are ineffective, or could awareness be the wrong success metric here? What are your kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when looking at it to see if purpose can reap a commercial benefit from the brand, then yes, we're looking at awareness to see are consumers aware of the brand's purpose and are they changing their behavior because of it? And we didn't measure behavior. We were first, again, looking at that first step and that gatekeeper to all the claims. So just because consumers are aware of the purpose, it doesn't mean that they will change their behavior because of it, but without being aware of it, it can't have any impact on their behavior. So that's what we focused on. It's not saying that these purpose brands can't get bought and the social objectives that they have, but we weren't measuring that. We were just focused on that awareness point for those commercial benefits. And in response to, I guess, those industry claims that it can drive significant growth or increase customer loyalty and price premiums, it was testing, okay, going out in the real world, what are consumers paying attention to and who is actually aware of it?
Yeah, I think that's what sits behind that question is what has the notion of brand purpose been touted to be, which it very much so has been touted to be. It'll help you with awareness and everything all the way through the funnel. And we're seeing anecdotally from Aidaly and in the research from Tori that certainly at that awareness level, there's a big question mark about whether or not societal purpose is fit for that purpose of raising awareness. And what I would say, if your entire brand idea is built around it, which is also a key proponent of the notion of brand purpose, then you're going to struggle from the rest of the funnel if you're struggling at the top of the funnel, because if it's not easy to get at the start, you can't unpack it later. Interestingly, Aidaly's talking about how we might go in on talking about intrinsics of the chocolate and other stuff, and then unpack the purpose stuff later, which does feel like a naturally more appropriate place because you've earned some time with the customer to explain your more complicated thing. And I think that holds regardless of whether the more complicated thing is a societal purpose. It might just be explaining the science behind how Head and Shoulders actually stops you getting flakes on your shoulders, right? Like you're not going to necessarily do that at the very top of it, but if you want somebody to really buy into your brand, they might want to know the science later when they've been reading the back of the packet. So yeah, really interesting.
Can I have a word?
Yeah, go.
I just don't think that people are that interested in the things that interest us too much. And this isn't my view. I always cite somebody who's much more respected than I am. And this was Sarah Carter, who was global planning head at Adam and Eve DDB, or whatever they're called now. And in a chat with John Evans 12 months ago to the day, she had this to say. And she said, we've just got to get comfortable with our insignificance in people's lives, and that, we influence the least important decisions that people make. And the best thing we can hope for is that they chuck our brand in their basket without thinking about it. And that's fine. But instead, we want other people to think that what we think about life is important. And we want them to feel that what might be important to us is important to them. It's terrifying, really, when you think about what that whole period did in terms of waste of money and implications of waste of profit. The whole collective losing of our marbles over the purpose period, it would be quite good to have a COVID-like purpose inquiry. So why exactly did we do that? Because we learned from it. And I would venture to say that people generally aren't interested in saving the planet. They're more interested in saving 50 quid off their car insurance.
Yeah, I think that's right. I've got a mate who runs a...
And may I also ask, has Aidaly, she's got a new TV spot out in the UK. Congratulations on that. But it does strike me as being what is classically known as a dual proposition, which is something that I always thought one should avoid. And you are talking about the chunkiness of the chocolate, and you get that message across very nicely. But you also talk about the fighting of exploitation. You've got your team wrestler. Does a dual proposition like that bother you at all?
So for the UK, it works for us. In the US, it would be harder for us to run a campaign like that. One, because our brand awareness is a little lower. I think the advantage we have in Europe is that we already have quite a high brand awareness. So it's like was mentioned earlier on the panel, is like what Victoria said. People know the brand, but they might not know the purpose. So for us,
Right.
it's really like balancing. You're introducing it to a new audience that you can
Yeah.
bring in with the chocolate, but the people that know it, it's good for them to understand the purpose behind it as well.
Yeah.
So I think that there's more room to kind of like balance it off and have the two messages. In the US market, it's a little different where we really feel like the competition here is far higher than it is in our category than it is in Europe. So we really feel like we need to land that message quickly. And usually the best way for us to bring an audience in a market that is still developing and still growing is to bring them in with that product. It's like what you just mentioned. It's the consumer cares about a good product. And then afterwards, they can feel better of, oh, I bought this product. I bought this chocolate. It was so good. And I feel better about it because I understand what they stand for now. And I understand that they stand for eliminating exploitation out of the cocoa industry. So I feel better. But I agree with you that I don't think that is the first, or from research we've done, that is not a category driver for purchase.
Do you
So
think that the
people buy it.
consumer has the bandwidth to worry about all of that on the inside of a chocolate bar? You know, you're telling them the story on the inside of the wrapper, and do you really think they're going to go, hang on a minute, I just wait until I finish reading my chocolate wrapper?
I think the way our brand is presented, people enter the brand because of the bold and the playful packaging. So
Beautiful
it stands
packaging.
out.
It's great
So
packaging.
they grab
I
it. But
think that
then
has
when they
something to
look
do with your
closer,
success.
you see our bar is unequally divided. That alone tells a story. So people start looking at it. Why is this bar? Some people get annoyed by it, but because of that annoyance, it's also like a conversation starter. So then they start looking further into it. I have to say, I lived in the Netherlands for a long time, and the first 3 years that I ate Tony's, because we used to share it at work, have a bar at the table in like on the department, and everyone would grab a piece. It took me a few years to really look at the mission of the brand because we were sharing a packaging. So I never looked at the packaging. I would just walk by, grab a piece of chocolate, and keep going. So that's why commercials like this in the US are important because people are like, oh my God, I've been eating this chocolate bar for a long time. Oh, now I get to learn more about them. So we don't want to shy away from communicating that. And we know that the consumers that are interested and are ready to take that ride with us will have the attention span for it.
Okay.
So again, the sort of time and a place to talk purpose thing comes through. Like, one, is the market mature enough, or is the brand mature enough in that market to the point where you don't really need to say it's chunky anymore because everybody knows that. You can now talk about other stuff. And two, actually, when the relationship with the customer on that individual level is deep enough, right? They have you yourself said you have to pick it up a lot of times before you might actually sit and read the whole thing. But I fully buy. I'm a big believer in the power of advocates, actually. And advocates might need more than it's just chunky and it tastes great, right? They want to be able to talk for ages about why they love the things that they love. And actually, if only a small percentage of people do that, that's still a win because only a small percentage will ever be advocates, right?
Yeah, we benefit a lot from word of mouth from our audience.
Yeah, interesting. All right, I'm going to stick with Steve for a little bit, Steve. You've done a bunch of research into brands who've given purpose a go, and you've been, particularly critical of some of those. But what have you seen in terms of how effective it's been? You know, what's the narrative in the industry in terms of trying, you know, brand purpose as the major strategy, and whether or not, you know, it's been a runaway success and now everybody's doing it, or are we cycling back from it? Tell us a bit about that.
Okay, as you know, Rob, I've been a long time skeptic about social purpose, but when I was banging on about this 5-6 years ago, the biggest problem I had was people would say, "Yeah, but why Unilever and Procter and Gamble? They're massive proponents of purpose. It must be working." And up 2019, you had Alan Jope at Unilever saying that we will get rid of brands if all they do is make your hair shiny, your clothes cleaner, and your food taste better. And we'd get rid of those brands, despite the fact that I always suspected that's the reason why people bought them. And I think that this delusion was funded by free money, to be quite honest, that free money lay at the bottom of the purpose delusion. And by that, I mean from 2010 to 2021, bank interest rates were on the floor, and you didn't have to actually achieve organic growth in order to keep the wheels turning back at the factory. Okay. But then when interest rates went up from 0 to the highest in 40 years in 2021, and inflation rates went up from 0 to 11%, then suddenly you started to have to sell things, and CMOs and CFOs, CEOs and CFOs started to look at their marketing people and say, "Where's the marketing budget gone?" And so eventually you've got people like Alan Joe by 2022 telling an increasingly unimpressed investors on an emergency call, "Our business groups are taking decisions more quickly and driving sharper strategic action. We're investing more in product quality and brand support to ensure that they offer superior performance and value." Within about a 12-month period, we went from moral superiority to product superiority as being the focus of not only Unilever's business, but Procter & Gamble's. Mark Pritchard, who had been a massive proponent of social purpose, by June 22 was saying the industry in general has just gone too far into the good and potentially not paying enough attention to growth. Growth now comes before good. The order matters because first and foremost, we're in business. Now more than ever, double down on making sure you have superiority from a product standpoint. We went from a period of free money to actually marketing departments having to earn it. And that's why we shift. That is why the purpose bubble burst.
Interesting. So big, huge economic context that you see as driving that. And do you think that the social aspect of that in our industry, in the creative industries, has caught up with that? I see a lot of people, you know, a lot of people will go to bat for brand purpose still, especially on LinkedIn, right?
When it comes to our progressive gaze, the progressive values, that we manage to stick hold of those that don't have a commercial driver. So we would, as an industry, still be knocking out our social purpose campaigns if it wasn't for clients who have actually got a bottom line to worry about, telling us, "I'm sorry, chaps, get out of the sandpit and start earning us some money, start selling. Let's reacquaint ourselves with our commercial purpose, i.e., building brands and short-term but consistent sales."
Got it. All right. Aidaly, anything to add from your point of view? Obviously, you have knowledge of your brand's growth in Europe and in the US, and it's spectacular growth in the US, we should say as well, right? Like, it's not, you know, you're in double-digit percentage growth 5 years consecutively or something. Like, how's that been done, and how much do you credit the idea of brand purpose for that? Like, or did you, you know, what was it incidental or used in other ways instead? So, you know, for a final word on that, I'd love to hear.
I think the short answer for that is that we let the product lead the way. But like I said, you have different audiences that you communicate to differently. So from when we first entered the US market, we were very focused on the natural channel. This is like the retail channels that you would have, like a Whole Foods, and those type of stores that fall under that category. So our product could mainly be found in those at those retailers, and it's because the mission opened the door for us to get us to those retailers. And then from that point, the packaging and just the product did a lot of lifting for us. And that consumer resonated with the brand and with the mission more. I think that the consumer that shops at Whole Foods is more inclined to understanding what's behind the brand, how the supply chain looks like. Not all of them, but they skew higher than a shopper that shops somewhere else. So I think it's that allowed us to grow. And with the success that we saw at a Whole Foods, for example, that opened other doors for us. So we could go to other buyers from other retailers and show them the numbers of how our product was performing. And obviously, when we start talking about our mission, they're inclined to really lean in and learn more about it. But then when we have the numbers to back it up of the success of the product itself, of the chocolate being good and consumers resonating with our flavors and our chocolate, it allows us to open the door further with other retailers that are more a mass market compared to these natural channel retailers.
It does remind me slightly of something that Victoria's colleague Byron Sharp said about Ben and Jerry. He said, I'd love to know how many consumers out there in the street are really aware of their backing for Palestinian homeland. I think they'd say, that's the one with the cookie dough, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's where I think and a lot of people have just been catching up on the comments. A lot of people are, saying like, let's make that distinction, right? Between, first of all, types of business for whom the purpose is absolutely central versus the ones where it isn't. I think if your story about your business is that it's trying to create societal change as its number one priority over and above other much more common things like delivering shareholder value or profit, then I don't think you have much choice in that respect other than to talk about your purpose, because that is your thing that you're all about. And
I also think that Ben and Jerry's really like they put their money where their mouth is. Things that they feel passionate about, they take the time to really educate the consumer, the wider consumer on it as they're driving sales for their product as well. They have like very good ice cream, but they don't shy away from having these like difficult conversations and these more hard topics, and they do take the time to really take the consumer through. They use their social channels for this a lot, to really take them to this educational journey, and you find that their consumer is receptive to that.
Yeah,
that's one
certainly
of the brands that Ehrenberg-Bass have researched, isn't it? And there is no recollection of Ben and Jerry's stance on any of these issues.
I think it speaks again to what we were speaking about as consumers, and that we're busy. We live, busy, normal lives. We're not speaking about brands that much. We're not thinking about brands that much. And even among the brands that we buy. So yes, a lot of the brands that we tested started with a purpose, were communicating the purpose, lived their purpose, and still consumers were not making that link. And I guess that's not a bad thing to take away from a purpose brand. It's just having realistic expectations about how you want to, I guess, grow, and what are going to be the best messages to put out there to grow your brand, and the best things to communicate. Because even among the brands that we buy, the consumers they had higher awareness of the brands that they bought, because naturally we know more things about the brands that we buy. Speaking to your point, Aidaly, with, the brands that you interact with, you'll see the packaging, you'll open it up, you might see the messages, but even among those, awareness is still low. So it's what else is helping that brand grow, and then I guess putting a more realistic expectation out there of, if you've heard all the claims about brand purpose and you're wanting to pursue it for significant sales growth, what that really looks like.
Yeah, I think we're clearly seeing that it's not a suitable mass awareness tool, but there may well be great roles for it, especially with those advocates that Aidaly's talking about. And I think those things can coexist quite comfortably and often happen in very different channels, right? Like the essay on the inside of a chocolate wrapper versus a 30-second TV spot. Victoria, did your personal opinion of purpose, this idea of brand purpose, change, after having done the research? What were your thoughts going into it and coming out of it?
Yes and no. I definitely started the research with a strong personal interest in the topic, shaped by my own behavior. I buy brands like Patagonia for their environmental reasons. And because of this, I assumed that others did so as well. But I think this is the really important thing about research, is to acknowledge your own biases and remain objective. We cannot ignore the evidence, even if it challenges our own assumptions, and in my case, the hopes for brand purpose. But it's a good reminder for everyone working in research to just be aware of your own biases you bring into it and to remain objective. Even after the research, full disclosure, I'm not anti-purpose after this. I still buy brands on purpose, and I'm sure other consumers do so too. But overall, it gives us, again, a more realistic picture of maybe how many do so with this.
Yeah, I think you probably ended up seeing yourself in a new light as one of those hyper engaged people that happen because you work in the industry. And that brings me on to book plug alert. We're going to do a book plug because Steve's new book came out in January, Adland's Progressive Gaze. Tori, I think you're typical of the industry, and I put myself in that as well. There's a big part of me as a human being that wanted brand purpose to be a sort of a bullet 10 years ago. I was skeptical because I do think that customers are hard to convince on even small things, let alone huge societal things.
Mm-hmm.
And so my question for you, Steve, is because obviously your new book, Adland's Progressive Gaze, available on Amazon now. We'll be sharing the link in the follow-up email, blah, blah, blah. Please do read it, everybody. It's excellent. What I'd like to hear from you is that the culture of Adland, the culture of our industry. How responsible is that for the misperception of brand purpose that we've readdressed a bit already? We don't need to go back into that, but what are the cultural drivers for this in our industry, and should we be looking at ourselves more?
Well, I think the scales fell from my eyes. Well, no, from pretty much everyone's eyes. Andrew Tens and Ian Murray wrote a couple of research papers, Aspiration Window, and I can't remember. But the outtake was that you need a very strong telescope to see Adland's bubble circulating the real world, to be quite honest. And we over-index even as far as our left-wing nature is concerned. Your magazine, I think, at the last election did an exit poll which showed that 84% of people in Adland would have voted for left or left of centre parties. 84% of Adland, whereas I think, was it 32% voted Labour? So almost 3-1 we over-index as far as our left-leaning tendency. Okay. And so this, I think, the embracing of purpose is indicative of an industry that doesn't feel too comfortable oiling the wheels of commerce and consumption. But I think there's another reason as well. We are an over-educated, university-educated, very posh, if you look at what our family backgrounds are, industry that is metropolitan and cut off from the mainstream, and does have, I think, a sense of entitlement and an expectation about self-actualization. And they came into an industry thinking they were working in an industry that was still culturally important. And unfortunately, it's drifted to the margins of both our culture and our business in their working lifetime. And I think that purpose gave them actually their own purpose. I think that they realized that they were actually drifting to the margins of culture and business. And I think that it gave them a raison d'etre. That purpose gave advertising its purpose and the people in it its purpose. So I think it was a lot of it about self-actualization.
I agree. And Mark Hadfield in the comments has written a nice piece. Everybody should have a bit of a read. And I know Mark very well. And Mark, you say, is it good that businesses develop brands want to deliver value to people beyond businesses and shareholders, and that can be different things to different people, and you don't think that that's a bad thing in the world. And I don't think any of us on this call would think that that's a bad thing in the world, that corporations should be good global citizens. For example, we're all bought into that. It's just when we conflate or confuse that with effectiveness from a marketing point of view, that we start to run into problems. And some of those problems I think are quite insidious. It ends up being like you see brands greenwashing or things that, purporting to do certain things when actually exacerbating the problem. Ben and Jerry's is an excellent recent example. Since the sale to Unilever, they've arguably betrayed some of their dearest held values. And do the consumers know about that? They certainly don't publicize it themselves. And I think that's where we feel there needs to be a bit of a reality check. Okay, Aidaly, I've got one more question for you. If you're the leader of a brand, and one that can hand on heart claim to live and breathe its purpose, right? Do you think outside of Tony's and the, in my opinion, handful of brands that can put the hand on the heart and say they live their purpose, do you think a lot of brands use it just to insulate themselves from criticism in some way? Is it, or is it what Steve's saying, people making themselves feel good about their job? What do you feel when you look over the fence and see washing powders claiming social purpose, even though they're owned by a large polluter? How do you feel about it?
I think that sometimes you have teams in these companies that genuinely care about the planet and genuinely want to present the product that is better for the people and better for the planet. I do think that we need to appreciate sometimes the steps that they are taking in the right direction and understand that, if you have like a big conglomerate, they might not change from one day to the other. So there is that side of it that I'm very sympathetic towards, because I know you meet a lot of people that work in these teams and you know how hard they are working to like make changes and really change companies from within. So can appreciate that a lot. But on the other side, you also have companies that have like maybe a small effort, and then the way they communicate it makes it look much bigger than what it is. And I think that's when they find themselves in like hot waters, when people start zooming in and really like diving into the facts of it all. They see that it's a lot of it is on the surface, or the claim of it is that it's bigger than what it is. And I think some companies have big marketing budgets that they can really push that message out. And that message is then, once it lands, the message itself is bigger than the project itself and the impact that they're having on the other side. And I think it's really like that balancing act of how much money do they have to push this out, and how much money are they really investing in these changes, and what is more important. And I think when they're more eager to communicate about it to earn brownie points, that's where it doesn't sit well with me, because I'm very much of just do good and people will notice that. The consumer that takes the time to dive in, they will notice that, and there is a word of mouth. So I kind of like, my advice is, if it's well intentioned and it's in the core and the work is being done, be patient and how you communicate it. Don't rash big campaigns and big communication, because it's then you start losing you start losing the plot a little bit, because the communication the attention becomes more important than the intention and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I think that unfortunately for us marketers, left-leaning bunch of lovely, superior people, as we like to believe they are, we're often trying to, steer the ship from not sitting in the captain's seat. Like if we did an exit poll of FDs at the last election in the UK, I think the ratio would be very different to the exit poll of Adland. And so, yes, well-intentioned is good, but I think well-intentioned is bad if it produces a bunch of cons that the business is not living out in real life. And
it's also bad, Rob, that if you're an activist working in advertising, you're using your clients' money in order, and your privileged media access to the public, in order to project your agenda using advertising to project that agenda upon the public. I think that's fraudulent behaviour, isn't it?
I think if it was only your view and not the view of, you know, a significant proportion of a business, I think there's entire teams inside these businesses that you know, think of the compliance people that have to even sign these kind of claims off. They will try at least to walk the walk as far as we can and as far as they can. And the best brands, some of them, you know, we work with AXA, and I think they've done a superb job, for example, with working with women who are victims of domestic abuse to bake features into the product set that benefit them. Now, that's a fundamental change to product that has then allowed them to run a purpose-driven campaign. And I fully support it. Does that mean that AXA are a purpose-driven brand from the absolute top shareholder mandate? No, but they're doing a brilliant job of what they can do from the seat that they're in. But I think, if you were using your client's money to just put out your own opinion, you know, without consensus, then
could Jaguar not be accused of that? Was that not response? Was the sense that the creative team at Jaguar were using the vast resources of Land Rover Jaguar's budget in order to project an image of a new car which was aimed at, I mean, you would surely say a very tiny, small niche market, wouldn't you? Looking at that communication, would you not say that that was slightly informed, that marketing, that creative strategy was slightly informed by the creative team's personal possible prejudices and beliefs?
It felt self-indulgent, I'll say that. I don't know whether or not they were all. The only thing I can think with JLR is that they were just all out of other cards to play at that point with a dying brand, and it was a moonshot. But I don't know what the story behind it was. Okay, well, we are probably at the time where we should get some questions from the audience. Richard, if there's anything that you think that we should address.
Yeah, there was one I was going to throw in a couple of minutes ago because you were kind of talking to Aidaly about this. But Aidaly, I've had a question for you asking what impact does having such a clearly defined purpose have on your day-to-day decision making within the business? I would imagine a lot because your product actually is shaped, you know, to communicate your brand purpose. So it must have a big impact on your day-to-day decisions in the business.
Absolutely. I'll give like one of the most recent examples. We, as a company, we publish our annual fair report. We call it our annual fair reports instead of annual report every year. In this, we communicate the amount of, we do like a very thorough research with our co-ops in West Africa, and we communicate the amount of child labor cases that we found that were found on different farms. But then the following year, we will communicate how many of these cases were remediated. That is a decision that sits so much in our core because we want to be transparent and we want to hold ourselves accountable. So we just launched our fair report earlier this month. So we communicate these numbers in them so that we can show our audience that we are working on these things. And these are things that some companies will shy away from. These are things that in the past on social media, people have come after us for because they're like, oh, you have these cases of child labor. But if you take the time and go through the full report, you see that the industry standard for child labor cases on cocoa farms is around 50%. For us, it's below 5%, and we are committed to changing that. And that's why we communicate those numbers. So it's like these decisions that are, you know, the easy way would be not to communicate them, but we communicate them and then we deal with the communication backlash that might come from it. But I think for people that are really engaged and have the right intentions in terms of communicating with us as a brand, they understand why we do it and they appreciate it.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. Another question I thought was quite interesting was do you think the timeline for embracing brand purpose and questioning its effectiveness differs across industries? For example, its dominant use is widely challenged today in FMCG, but it still enjoys broad consensus in professional services and remains an innovative approach in the charity sector. What are your kind of thoughts on that?
Steve?
They do. I thought that was one for Victoria, but as far as the research
Um,
was concerned,
yeah, I'm happy to answer that. Well, I think in the charity sector, that's a completely different sector there. As far as the FMCG, like the charity sector is inherently purpose, I guess you would say, and looking at those messages with getting people to donate. With the services sector, we haven't done research in it, but that would be an interesting avenue to see that if awareness is higher compared to FMCG in the B2B and the services. We predominantly focused on those packaged goods, but yeah, that would be a definitely interesting area to look at.
Yeah. I'd agree. I think just to responding to a couple of comments, because I've read them, one theme keeps coming up, which is where people defend brand purpose by pivoting to a slightly different version of it, where they talk about a purpose other than the functional purpose of the product. Dirt is Good was, Gillian, you mentioned that in an example. Dirt is Good is an absolutely fantastic campaign and ran for years and years. It's not a societal purpose campaign. It doesn't claim to be changing society or doing good for people or planet in any way. It's just good old fashioned selling the benefit. And the benefit is joy for your kids. They get to run around and cover themselves in crap, and then you can get it all out of their clothes again. And one thing I want to be really careful of is, for me, we're seeing the death knell of purpose across all of these big uses in terms of awareness now. And we just need to be careful not to try and defend it by redefining it as something that we already had before. Because I've seen a couple of people do that. We've come after the idea of putting societal purpose front and center as a blanket silver bullet. That doesn't mean there isn't a great place for purpose-driven businesses. It doesn't mean that there isn't a great place for purpose messaging for any brand who wants to build advocates or do some other stuff that's good for society, as well as the other things it's doing that is good for its bottom line. It's just that we need to get that time and a place right and understand what we're actually critiquing here. I think it's been an amazing debate. Thank you, everybody, panelists and commenters alike. I've really, really enjoyed myself. At Nonsense, we talk a lot about building credibility for brands, and we deliberately picked that word rather than talking about, doing good or anything, because we just think that brands should walk their talk. If there's anybody here who thinks that, they have a brand that could benefit from a bit of additional credibility, we're offering some free credibility clinics. Sorry, I should have said here comes the sales pitch, shouldn't I? But there's always a little bit at the end when you run one of these. We've only got 3 of these up for grabs. So my email address is here on the slide. Get in first, email me if you would like a 30-minute Q&A with someone from my strat team, using our What Makes a Credible Brand framework to help us diagnose what's really driving or limiting your brand's credibility by reframing the problem through our own 6-pillar thing that you can see on the left. And I will stop talking about nonsense and go back to the room and just say thank you again to everybody. So I'll drop my email address in the chat, but that was excellent. And sorry we didn't have time to answer everybody's questions.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that was a great session. Thank you to Rob, Aidaly, Steve, and Victoria for sharing your insights there all around brand purpose, and thank you to everybody. There's some great comments going in there in the chat. There was kind of like a conversation going in here, and then there was another one going on in the chat room. So it's really good that you were all engaged and enjoyed the conversation. Again, thanks for being with us, everybody, and we shall see you all very soon.